Inside the Huddle. Like us on Facebook at Inside the Huddle WTKA.
Hey, welcome back to Inside the Huddle. It's almost tournament time. Next week, the Big Ten tournament starts down in Indianapolis. The week after that, the NCAA tournament. Where will we be watching the games? Because most of us, unfortunately, will not be able to travel to Indy or to Cleveland or to LA or wherever they have them. But we want to watch with fellow Michigan fans, cheer for the Maize and Blues, sing the victors when they win their games. There's no better place in downtown Ann Arbor than the Pretzel Bell, which is wall-to-wall Michigan sports. In fact, it's covered wall to wall with Michigan pictures and black and whites and a lot of history in there, with so many of the investors being former players or coaches themselves. Has terrific food, great drinks, local beers on tap, and wherever you're sitting, you have a great view of the game with more than 30 TVs throughout both floors of the Pretzel Bell. You can learn much more by going to thepretzelbell.com. We, of course, will be there the first Friday of March Madness. Looking forward to that as always. So, gentlemen, this is the question that I asked on Twitter earlier. How confident are you that the good, in quotations, Michigan basketball team will show up in the postseason? I mentioned this yesterday after the game, how quickly the pendulum swings on a season. And when you look at the Wolverines, I mean, that has really been the case. The great start, they're undefeated at 7-0. They've beaten Gonzaga and North Carolina at the Battle for Atlanta's championship. They rise all the way up to number 4 in the rankings. They're just flying high. A couple weeks later, they lose back-to-back games to Illinois and Oregon. A little bit of they got their first kind of taste. They beat a couple of nobody teams, Presbyterian and UMass Lowell, and then they lose 5 out of the next 6 games, including a couple of home games to Penn State and Illinois. A lot of panic. Are they on the bubble? Are they going to get to the tournament? Then what happens? They ride a 2-game and then a 5-game win streak, so 7 out of the next 8. All we're talking about is, can they rise up all the way to a 5 seed, maybe even a 4 seed? And now back-to-back losses at home to Wisconsin, on the road to Ohio State, where one could argue the bad Michigan team showed up. They can't defend the 3-point line. They don't shoot the ball themselves very well. Mentioned it earlier, out of an 8-man rotation, 2 guys have played well out of the 8-man rotation, and that's Xavier Simpson and Franz Wagner, who has shown up in the second halves of both of those games. And so you look at this team, and I think a lot of Michigan fans are trying to figure out, okay, they got 2 games left, then they're getting the Big Ten tournament, then they're getting the NCAA tournament. Yeah, how do I know the good Michigan team is showing up? How confident should I be that the good Michigan team is showing up, the one that gives Michigan a chance to get to the semifinals or the finals of the Big Ten tournament, the team that gives Michigan a chance to get to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament? Because if that team shows up, anything is possible. If that team doesn't show up, if the one that shows up against the Badgers and Buckeyes these last 2 games, Michigan could get bounced in the first game of the Big Ten tournament and bounced in the first game of the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, it does look like the pendulum is swinging back and forth. I kind of contest that it's good Michigan team versus bad Michigan team, because I mean they were tied with Ohio State on the road while Ohio State was playing extremely well in with like 5 minutes to go. Obviously the floor kind of fell out, but they've had some wins where they looked so. They've had some losses where I think they actually did play well. That's the beauty of playing in that's the beauty of the Big Ten this year. I mean, Minnesota almost won at Wisconsin last night. It's just a little bit more parity. I think this week's really critical, though. They don't have class. They are basically preparing for a gimme game in Nebraska. It's the first gimme game I would say they've had. Well, I guess maybe the other time they played Nebraska and the other time they played Northwestern. But haven't had a lot of those since before Thanksgiving. You can probably count on one hand the number of quote-unquote gimme games they've had since November. Well, since they played Elon, way back in November 15th or whatever it was. They've played 5. So anyway, should be a lighter week. If Isaiah Livers has a bum ankle, I'm not saying that he does, but if he does, he can rest on that. Brooks can continue taking some antibiotics, continue flushing out the headaches, the sinus infection, some of the other ailments that come with a broken nose. Anybody who's broken a nose knows better than I do, but it sounds like it wasn't even like the actual bone break that was the worst part of his week. It sounds like it was the residuals of it. They can get some shots up. They don't necessarily have to get stressed or pressured, because it's a big game or whatever. Their eyes can turn toward the postseason a little bit. And I do think Michigan seems to be a little bit better of a one-day turnover type team. I do think the Bahamas tournament showed that. They have guys, and I was talking to some Ohio State reporters after the game because fans were like, "Oh, Ohio State made a good decision passing on Xavier Simpson." They're like, he's played in a championship game. He's hung a couple banners already. He might not have been the all-world point guard that some might have thought he was going to be, but at the same time, they're going to go into those games. Isaiah Livers, John Teskey, and Xavier Simpson especially. They're not going to be scared of anything. They're not going to be. You could use a different word there. They've seen it all. They've seen guys who are stars in the NBA now. They've played national title games. They've played in front of 70,000 fans. They've played in 3 Big Ten tournament championships now. If you think about it, even last year, even though they lost, they were on that stage in a sold-out United Center. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm fully confident that Michigan will exceed expectations in the postseason, but I do think there are a few cards in their favor. They're not going to be shooting with a road team's ball. They're going to have full shoot-arounds and practices at these gyms to get comfortable. And so it just comes down to, does that defense show up? Because if they pack their defense to Indianapolis, I do think they can hang with I want to see Maryland a little bit more, but I think they can hang with everybody else. I don't think there's a team out there that's Michigan doesn't have a chance against. This week's critical, though. They have to be better than they've been. Sunday, maybe you can attribute it to a little bit of a tired leg schedule loss. Thursday, they just didn't look like they wanted to win. And at least in those first, 5-10 minutes when they were down by 10 to Wisconsin immediately at home. Yeah, we'll see. The energy, in some ways, these losses, if they lead to more motivation and more energy and more hunger, then I don't think any fan would mind that they lost these 2 games. At the same time, if it kind of puts a dent in that confidence and it spirals, then it might be a pretty quick month.
What you just said, the confidence factor is why this game against Nebraska on Thursday is so critically important for them, because they need to get that confidence back. To have lost, to be one of 4 teams in the Big Ten with 4 or more home losses this season, that couldn't have been good for their psyche going into the Ohio State game on the road. And so, they've got to get some of that back against Nebraska. And I think you can see it. You can see John Teskey not really playing with confidence on either side of the floor. You can see Isaiah Livers looking out of sorts and playing without the level of confidence that he's had. David Julius certainly seems like, and Brandon Johns. Those 4 guys, to me, when you watch them play, you see a lot of hesitation in their game. And when you see hesitation from guys either on the defensive end or the offensive end, or the defensive end, you see someone like Isaiah Livers getting blown past, or Brandon Johns getting blown past and giving up the baseline to either a dunk or a layup or having to foul the guy. That to me speaks to okay, these guys are not playing confident. They're not playing on their toes. They're not playing with the same level of aggressiveness. And so they need a game like Nebraska to get themselves back. Brandon, how confident should Michigan fans be going into the postseason that the good Michigan team will show up?
I'm starting to think not very. I just think when you look at the whole season, and certainly the Isaiah Livers injury is a big factor of that. I think the Wisconsin loss, not having Eli Brooks, was a huge part of that. But that's college basketball. You deal with some ups and downs. You do run into some adversity. Very rarely does a team go through a season without having to switch the starting lineup because of injury, at least a little bit here or there. So it's part of it. But I think the inconsistency has been too consistent, if that makes sense. Like there's just been so could the good Michigan team show up in the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament? Absolutely. They could get hot and get on a run because we've seen that. But I don't think you should be very confident that that's going to happen. I think that's the best way to put it, because we've just seen too much of what we've seen over the last 2 games, and during that 4-game stretch where they lost, multiple home games. Again, Isaiah Livers was hurt. That's a big part of it. But now he's back, and he doesn't really look like himself, at least for the last couple of games. I know, again, I referenced the game against Purdue. He had 19 points, and they went into Mackey Arena and won where they hadn't won in 6 years. So they've just been too inconsistent too often. So I don't know how you can feel confident, like, yes, this team is definitely going to show up tonight. They're definitely going to hit their shots. They're definitely going to be locked in on defense, because it just hasn't been there enough for long enough stretches. Now, I think Zach makes a good point. Like, the stakes change, after these next 2 games. The stakes are very different. You've got a couple of senior leaders in Xavier Simpson and John Teskey who might really take things to another level in terms of focus and bringing everybody else along with them, talking to those sophomores a little bit more about what they need to do, specifying their roles a little bit more. I mean, because you lose and you're done. I mean, so it's not like, I'm not saying they didn't want to win these games, but things change. The mentality changes. The reality of your season being over is there. But no, I think, to answer your question straight away, I don't think you can be confident. I just don't. I think it's been too up and down too often for whatever the reasons have been. If I'm knocking on wood here, God, help it doesn't happen, but Isaiah Livers comes down on a foot or something, and he's got that ankle again, and now what do you got? So I just don't think, and I know that can happen to anybody at any time, but he's been dealing with that throughout the course of his career and obviously over the last few games. So, no, I don't think you can be that confident that the good Michigan team is going to be there. It's certainly possible, but I think that's a big if.
I think you probably wake up, you look at the matchup, who they've got in the Big Ten, and who they have in the tournament, and you say, okay, I mean, this game could probably go either way. I mean, if they end up as the 7 seed in the Big Ten tournament, or the 7-10 seed, or the 8-11 seed,
8-9, yeah,
8-9 seed. Sorry, I mean, that's a game that they could win or lose. And when they get to the NCAA tournament, if they fall down to a 7, if they fall down to an 8 seed, I mean, then it's, I think at any given day, it's right now, it looks like it's a 50-50 proposition, unless they're in a matchup that really favors them. And then they really, I mean, when you look at their schedule, who have they lost to this year that was like a really bad loss? Maybe the Minnesota game, but even then it was on the road without Isaiah Livers.
Yeah, Maryland just almost lost there too.
Yeah, they don't have bad losses. They don't have like a team that they really should not have lost to. So you probably feel good as long as they're in a matchup that favors them. But if they're in a toss-up type of game, I think it's a toss-up type of opportunity for them. You really don't know if they're going to bring their A game that's capable of beating anybody, or they're going to bring their, I don't know what you call the last 2 games, their C+ game, their C- game that's not going to beat anybody.
So something you just said makes me kind of reinforces my opinion on, we just don't really know exactly what you're going to get on a given night with this Michigan team. What kind of matchup is favorable for Michigan? Because they've lost some games that I'm like, oh, they've got an edge in that one, and they've somehow managed to lose. Whether it be at home to Ohio State when Ohio State wasn't playing that well. I thought that would be a win for Michigan at home personally. I don't really like. You'd think like, okay, if there's an undersized team, then it's Teskey, but he hasn't been.
Yeah, I
just wonder like what kind of team is that they have a decided.
I think an unathletic
matchup against
big helps them a lot because of Teskey not being able to go out and defend the 3, like what we've seen out of Weston being able to hit the 3. Luka Garza can step out there a little bit. Wisconsin has a couple of guys that can step out there and shoot it.
Look, I'm not. This is not bashing. Like, I'm not saying they don't have a matchup advantage over anybody. I'm asking, like, literally, like, which, what certain construction of a team do you think Michigan automatically has an advantage over before they even start the game?
I mean, they looked like they were just bad matchups for Rutgers and Purdue, and I don't know if there's anything. I mean, Rutgers doesn't really go through the big man. Purdue is the opposite. They totally go through the big man, but I think it's more on the defensive side of things. It's just they don't turn the ball over, and you saw yesterday they were still pretty good at not turning. I mean, they had 12, I think they ended up with, but a couple of those were offensive fouls that were, I don't know. I'm always interested in how officiating changes in the postseason. I feel like they call less ticky-tack things, and teams that don't foul a lot tend to have an advantage. Wisconsin, Virginia, Michigan, look at some of their postseason runs the past few years. But yeah, I think it's actually more internal. I mean, I think you bring up a good point. Is there a matchup where it's like, oh, they're great against those teams? In the Big Ten, probably not, because no matter what direction you are, I'd say, oh yeah, they probably would do well against 3-point shooting teams because they're good at running teams off the line. But Wisconsin's almost like too good of a 3-point shooting team, where suddenly that's a bad matchup for Michigan because that's kind of what they hang their hat on defensively. So. Yeah. So, and a lot of it's going to be quantity of shots too, and the quality of the looks that you're settling for. And Ohio State, they do shoot at a decent amount. So maybe with the current state of the defense, that's the bad matchup, is you don't want a 3-point heavy team. Purdue and Rutgers, pretty pitiful percentage-wise at shooting threes. So maybe that's the matchup. Honestly, though, I'm kind of with you guys. Unless someone can tell you right now Isaiah Livers is going to play like he did 2 weeks ago, or like he did in November and December, I don't think anybody is expecting them to go very far in either tournament. And I think one element two things I want to add here. One, NCAA tournament. I think I would assume Big Ten teams have quote unquote figured out Juwan Howard more than a typical NCAA tournament team would be. That was one thing where Michigan's offense under Beeline always thrived in the NCAA tournament because
you couldn't prepare for it.
Yeah, because these coaches didn't have like all these games of film. They didn't have all this multiple matchups in a season to kind of figure things out. And then the other thing I would say, because your point about confidence, how confident is this team? I think this is a team that can gain it back faster, because literally one Monday ago, or even like 5 days ago, last Wednesday, we were talking about this
on top
team.
of the world.
Yeah. So I think that I'm curious. We don't know. I'm curious if maybe when there's a stake, because what were they playing for these past couple days? Higher seeds.
Yeah, but that's something.
It's something. It's something. I think it's easy to, especially if you have players injured or dinged up. I don't know. I think it could be a little different. I've seen it enough. I mean, remember in 2017 they were 8 seed in a worse Big Ten, and then in 2018 they were a 5 seed in a pitiful Big. I mean, there were only 4 teams that made the tournament, and they were the 5th seed in the Big Ten tournament.
The interesting thing about it too is that not that it's gone in 2-game segments, but it does seem like Michigan is a streaky team, right? I mean, they got really hot at the Battle for Atlantis. Then they come back, they lose to Louisville, they lose 3 out of the next 4. They have that stretch where they lose 5 out of 6, including 4 in a row: Minnesota, Iowa, Penn State, Illinois. And they come back, they win 2 in a row. I mean, like, if all they've got to have is one of those weekends where they feel really good, and then you could win 2 games.
Right.
And if they get to the next weekend, you just never know. Like,
that's exactly what I'm saying.
It's almost like if
you simply can't feel confident that that's going to
it's
happen.
almost like if they
that was
get
my
to the
point.
NCAA tournament and they're the 7th seed, or they can bounce back here and get to the 6th seed, and they could win 2 games, boom, boom, like that. But then the next weekend they just get bounced without any type of.
If Michigan's the 7 seed and they win, and then they would be a 2, right?
Yeah.
If they and the 2 seeds aren't like world beaters. I think some of the projected ones, like, they're good teams.
Dayton,
obviously. Yeah, I mean,
types.
If Michigan wins their first game as a 7 seed and then upsets the 2 seed, nobody's going to be like, I'm shocked. Like, nobody's going to feel that way. But and on the flip side, if they lose the 7-10 matchup, no one's going to be shocked by that either. That's kind of speaking to the point of, like, getting streaky, hot versus cold at this. But I just don't think you can feel confident about either direction, really. It's just like you just hope, like you said, Mike, you just hope that they have one of those good weekends where it's just clicking for them and they can beat anybody.
It's kind of how college basketball goes.
Yeah, I mean,
there's very few teams who are like counting on a second weekend trip.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
It feels that way even more. It's felt that way all year in the Big Ten. It's felt that way all year with Michigan, and really kind of across the whole land. Like, there's not a dominant team this year. Like I said, in years past when you fill out your bracket, there's almost always like one team that has the huge majority.
You don't see that in Kansas?
I mean, they're playing better now.
Yeah.
They'll probably be they'll be
They'll
the
be that
one.
trendy team.
But
yeah.
is it 60% or 30%
Right.
type of thing? I don't know. Usually it's like there's one for sure, and then everybody's like, I'm going to pick this team to be different, and then,
Right.
But yeah, there's not really that.
Yeah, there's
this
no
year.
Virginia Villanova type team this season.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
Kansas would probably be that team, and it'd be interesting to look back at what those numbers are on those bracket fill outs. You know how there's always an overwhelming majority pick. I don't think you're going to see that this year as much.
All right, so coming up on the show, we'll have a little bit more Michigan basketball talk, with just college basketball talk overall. We'll also get into some Michigan football talk. Will Heininger, former Michigan defensive lineman, will be joining us in the 11 o'clock hour. He'll be running in the Ann Arbor Marathon. He's one of the celebrities. We'll talk to him a little about that, and then also his take on this Michigan football team. We'll get into the defensive line and linebackers, what we think we know, what we're curious about, and what's our prediction for the spring. This is Inside the Huddle on Sports Talk 1050, WTK The Ticket.
This is Inside the Huddle with Michael Spath.
What do we got here? Inside mahogany.